Good evening, friends. Hello and welcome from wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to the Career Shifts podcast Journey to the Future. Before we jump in, I wanted to use this opportunity to thank you. Thank you for the wonderful love that you have all showed to this podcast. It's been 1 year, 34 episodes, and the quest to learn more just increases. Thank you for showing up each week. Thank you for leaning in discomfort and for reminding me that work isn't just about what we do, it's also about how we show up, who we build it with, and why it all matters in a world that's changing faster than ever before. Today's episode is for every leader who's ever said, I just don't get this new generation. And to every Gen Z employee who silently thought, maybe the workplace was never built for people like me. Because it's not about, or it is about evolving workplaces. It is about identity. It is about inclusion and quiet culture. The clashes that happen in conference room and conference calls and everywhere. If you're talking about moonlighting, side hustles, reverse mentoring, hybrid fatigue, emoji wars, Slack sarcasm, quiet quitting, and the loud question that underneath it all is the employee employer relationship getting rewritten forever? Can 5 generations of workforce really work together without losing trust or sanity? And what kind of leadership will it take to navigate all of this? And that's where today's guest comes in, Sajit. He's known for his bold voice in people and culture space, a seasoned HR leader who's not afraid to challenge old playbooks, and someone who believes that the future of work won't be built by HR. It will be built by people who are already ready to imagine what human capital truly means. Here's what we're going to explore together. Why Gen Z is not a problem to solve, but a signal to decode. What needs to fundamentally shift in how we manage across generations? How inclusion cannot be cosmetic but cultural? And why new workplace contract is not about control but about co-creation. So, whether you're a manager, a millennial, a founder, or a frustrated HR head, if you've ever asked yourself, why is everything changing so fast? Or how do I lead when the rules keep shifting? This episode is for you. Let's dive in. Sajit, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you, Gopal, for having me on the show. Very well.
Wonderful. Sajit, I started this journey about a year ago with the only intention, and I keep saying this to a lot of my colleagues who I meet often, the intention was to give back to the community. And even if 1% of people listening into the show make subtle changes into whatever they do, I think my job is done. And I've had decent success, I would say. And I would want to continue the legacy with bringing in people like you and who are just not here to share their experiences, but also help us on this journey to the future. So before we get into the typical chat or whatever we are here for, I wanted to check if you have any opening thoughts, comments about being here on the show today.
First and foremost, congratulations on having completed one full year. Wishing this podcast of yours many, many, many more decades of useful knowledge sharing. And I'm sure it's going to do yeoman service to a lot of people, not only now, but in the years to come. So do continue the good work that you have been doing. And Gopal, wish you all success in this.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Sajid, this podcast is called Career Shifts. And it's a kind of career a lot of people perhaps wouldn't have thought about a decade ago. The kind of shifts that we are seeing these days because of various aspects of, be it technology that has advanced, be it the kind of people that we are seeing right now, be it the kind of education that we are seeing right now. So I want to put the spotlight on you now. Why don't you walk us through your career journey? Where did you start, and what are you up to these days?
Okay, wonderful. So I've been working for over 35 years now. Began my career in the central government with the Department of Finance, customs to be specific, intelligence, and then moved into the corporate world. Yeah. And thereafter, I worked in multiple companies, started with the SR Group, and from there moved into Airtel, and then to the Tata Group, uh, then to the airport, Bangalore International Airport. Thereafter, for a fixed duration with the Quess Corporation, and now I plan to do something of my own. So that's in a
Incredible,
nutshell
incredible,
35 years. Yeah.
incredible. Yeah. So incredible journey, Sajit. Who would have thought from the intelligence to being in HR and now planning to do on your own? So, fascinating story. What led to those shifts, if I may ask?
Uh, well, it's also the passage of time, as you rightly pointed out. Being the Gen Y or the Gen X, sorry, we were the Gen X. We thought the right thing to do, we began a career was with the central government. There were very few options available then. So the typical middle class mentality was to find a job for yourself, and the government was the safest and the best employer to work for. And then we saw the change of the Indian corporate scenario wherein privatization started coming to the fore. So moved along with that change in scenario and realized the opportunities that came along when you moved into the private sector. Not before we saw the normal objections of the elders in the family, the extended family to be precise, wondering who would give up a central government security of a job and move into the private sector which comes with a lot of uncertainty, and unpredictability. But the scenario and the changing corporate scenario is what actually helped me move. And thereafter, as an HR professional, I've always believed that having a mosaic of industries experience makes you a far proficient HR professional rather than being stuck to a particular industry by itself, because each industry has got its own uniqueness and idiosyncrasies, if I may say so. And therefore, it makes you a slightly more adept HR professional. So that was the primary driving factor in which moving between industries.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sajid, I think we are living through times which are very interesting today. We are kind of seeing quite a lot of, if I were to call it as generational shifts as one part of it, but I think a lot of friction that perhaps is bothering a lot of people in the workforce. And you have perhaps seen this all in the last 3 decades of your corporate career. Has something fundamentally shifted, and has something fundamentally changed in organizations and workplaces? What are your views on that?
Okay, Gopal, let me step back for a moment and explain something that I believe is what has happened in India. Till the early 90s, we were a scarcity hit society. There were a limited number of opportunities. There were a limited number of courses to be done. There was a limited number of possibilities available. And in the mid 90s, with the privatization coming in, we have now, in the last 25 years, if I must say so, moved actually into a relatively sufficient society. Now, this also transformed the manpower that is available in India today. There was a time till the mid 90s and the late 90s where grab what you get was the attitude of employees. Thereafter, gradually, we've now moved into a mode wherein we are now in a position to actually, and if you look at the current generation, the Zs and the Alphas, they have the opportunity to pick and choose and just let go. Otherwise, they're willing to sit back and wait. So societally and economically, we've got this opportunity to be able to pick and choose. We are a far more stable manpower, where there is an element of choice to be exercised. We've definitely moved from the survival mode where, grab what you get and earn a livelihood. It's no longer a livelihood. That's the word that's changed, actually.
Yeah.
Today,
True.
Today, I'm pursuing a career or something of my interest. It doesn't necessarily pay my bills exclusively. There was a time when all it did was pay my bills or
yeah,
intended to pay my bills. So
yeah,
I'd like to think that that is what the difference happened. However, the so-called senior management or the people of the Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, some of Gen Z actually, not all of them, who are now the so-called leadership cadre,
Hmm.
are still probably operating in the mode where, I'm here because I need to do my job. And then having to administer a set of team members whose primary approach and ideology is completely different. This, I'd like to believe, is what causes the so-called friction in digital commerce. I would call it dichotomy of sorts.
Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting. Very interesting. Um, if we really look at this set of values, we spoke about values as one of the key differentiators between what I would value in the past versus what I'm valuing today. And of course, the 1992, the 2001, the 2008, and 2022, if I were to call that as events that kind of changed the course of how things were being done. Um, do you see that has had an effect in the way people are perceiving their jobs today? Has there been a change in that as well?
Very, very pertinent question is what you asked, Gopal. I like to think that the biggest impactor has been the post-COVID era.
Hmm.
It wouldn't have we wouldn't have seen such a noticeable difference in the mental setup of the current generation had it not been for the COVID. Let's touch upon a couple of things that have actually changed completely with the COVID. For a start, I like to believe that by 2030, we would
Hmm.
probably have engineers and doctors who gave their final exams for graduating into their respective professional fields on a screen,
Yeah.
which was never the case before.
Yeah.
And it was for no fault or no control of theirs, that particular segment. And this is a set of people we are now going to have in our manpower,
Hmm.
which also in turn has had a couple of fundamental shifts in the way things operate in the hierarchy of an organization.
Hmm.
Point number one, the so-called illusion of control, which we inherited from the Britishers because they were the bosses and they could control us. There was a model of control and getting work done till the time that we went technology savvy. You had to reach office on a particular time. There had to be a proximity, which means you had to be present when called.
Hmm.
And finally, there was the overhanging compliance, which ruled the entire office and the workspace.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this is completely evaporated. And in turn, people also now have realigned themselves. They believe that they need to show a sense of purpose of what they're doing in that organization. And that sense of purpose has now forced the presence, the proximity, and the compliance to kind of vacate their seats and say, you have no role to play now in this form of corporate. Business to be
True.
conducted, profits to be made. There are better ways and means of doing it, seems to be the new message that we all need to accept.
You've been bringing in a very interesting point. And I think this is a struggle for a lot of leaders to, come to terms with.
Absolutely.
And I wrote about that today as well on LinkedIn, about the kind of expectations that people had in the past about how the work had to be done. Uh,
Correct.
More of conforming to a particular rule book. Now, the rule book would be you have to come in to office on time, leave perhaps never. You have to come and deliver products and services and whatever outcomes that you're talking about in a particular quality. Makes sense till the point of time that the end user or end customer is able to consume it well, right? Now, that rule book has perhaps not been updated for a while, wherein you are today facing a situation where the consumers are going to be your Gen Zs.
Correct.
And they have a specific set of values about how they would be embracing a new brand or their service or not, right? So do you see this conflict playing out at workforces where the rules that which we are playing at maybe designing a product or delivering a service are in direct conflict with the kind of expectations that the external public have, but we within the organizations, the millennials and Gen Alpha, Gen X, Gen Y have not really kind of done enough to update themselves. Is that what is also playing out in the workforce?
Absolutely, Gopal. What you just said, actually, if I were to put it as one phrase, I would think that flexibility has to be the new keyword. There's no more my way or the highway. Because let's not forget that the newer generation is far more knowledgeable. They have more information at their disposal in comparison to the same age that the Gen X's and the Gen Y's were. Now, that is also a bone of contention. Because subconsciously, as a 58-year-old today, a 28-year-old is probably trying to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Now, I am correlating that 28-year-old with a 28-year-old who refused to sit in front of his boss in his cabin, let alone question him.
Yeah.
But that's because I had no information, I had no internet, I had no Google to give me all state-of-art information or to be on top of things. Therefore, with that kind of information available, I'd like to think that the other issue that's happened is that technology is also being perceived a little wrongly or differently by the earlier generations. All right? Technology is not here in any way to transform anybody. It's holding a mirror up to you to tell you that this is not the way to do it. It's like a mirror, Gopal, you and I step in front of a mirror before leaving home.
Yeah.
It's for self-correction. It's for finding out what isn't right. We need to look at technology with that same point of view. It's just reflecting what your wrongs are and what your rights are. Set the wrongs right. And that's precisely in his own subtle ways what your Gen Zs and your Alphas are telling you. That this is not exactly the right way anymore. It may have been when you were a 28-year-old, but 30 years hence, there are better ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Another thing that we would probably need to kind of hammer in is the ability to be flexible. Is not a perk anymore. We always thought of it. The Gen X's and Gen Y's always thought that giving flexibility to the team was a perk that I am bestowing upon them. It's not. There's no more. It's all about autonomy. And today's generations look at autonomy as being treated with dignity, and it's about trust. So if you give me autonomy, if you give me the freedom to be flexible, you're also making it sure or amply stating that you trust me to do what is expected of me, and thereby you're also treating me with dignity.
Sure.
And this is exactly, I think, what needs to be addressed in a subtle manner. We're still operating the way our bosses treated us. I'm repeating what I said, but what was 30 years, what got us here probably for the X and Y generations may not take us there.
Yeah, very interesting, and true in fact as well. But I'm going to kind of also play a bit of a devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I spent a couple of years in one of the top-rated institutes in the country, and by virtue of that, had the chance to work with people in the government. And I joined this institute just about a couple of months after the Wave 2 ended, and we were all told that we need to report to work by next week, saying that this is a government order. And I heard a lot of stories about how a lot of people in the government really, worked so hard during the COVID when a lot of us were sitting at home, taking care of ourselves and our near and dear ones. But they were the ones who were literally like the COVID warriors. Um, I've seen that from very close, perspective on how difficult it is for them to even imagine working remotely. Uh, for example, a civil servant in a panchayat, for example, a civil servant in a city or a state or a municipal corporation, they don't have this luxury. So, are we seeing apart from the generational divide that we see, but also are we seeing occupational divide, where one set of workforce is being able to command and demand, hybrid work and flexibility, whereas the other side is just not being able to experience this. And I'm sure, I mean, with your work in the airports that you just did a couple of years ago, you would have seen something very similar playing out there as well. So what are your views on that?
Okay, first let me identify the fundamental difference between the two. If I were to use the government workforce on one side, to simplify the way you put it, and the other side you have the corporate workforce. You know, please remember, the government workforce is not primarily there for the motive of profits. All right? That's not what keeps their existence up, which is not the case with the corporate world. The corporate world thrives, survives, and lives on profit making.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So as long as the end result is achieved, beyond the point, once we have kind of soft the business honchos, the flexibility to be able to work from anywhere is possible. Allow me to now use another word. Government officials represent governance of every order, which also translates into being held in slightly higher esteem in matters of hierarchy. I'm sure on a lighter vein, you and I agree that even a clerk in an RTO looks like our boss. We go there to get our licenses renewed, no matter what your private sector designation is. You need to go and stand in front of him and sign your document. Now, that's the way our society, especially the Indian society, operates. And as a given for the government agencies, there is an element of being seen in their own den, which is what makes them the officers. Imagine meeting the district collector of a small town in a mall. You wouldn't differentiate him from Adam from Apple. What makes him the district collector is the pilot lamp on top of his car and the grand cabin that he sits in with the near throne-like chair.
Absolutely.
We still, as a society, haven't grown out from that so-called strappings of power. And as a part of that comes this inability to move away from the office and being the office bearer in the government sector. It's an inherent gain of benefit or reality. It's like being a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian. You know what I mean? You're born in a particular community, you have to be a vegetarian.
Right.
And you're born in another community, you are a non-vegetarian by default. I'd like to think the similar situation is what is the differentiator between the government officials and, but like that, if technology were to get further advanced, with 3D now becoming a reality, it wouldn't be far before some of the more advanced countries is in a position to actually permit people to operate from places which are not necessarily an office space. As long as the decorum and the basic strappings required to ensure their enforcement is not hindered in any way.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that they will also probably go the corporate way.
Very well said. And I think, it's a very interesting perspective. I didn't think about it that way, about how, the power brings in the expectations. But I'm sure there may be other perspectives to it as well, as the lack of digitization as one of the other things being a reality. Like corporates have access to a lot of budgets, which allows us to do a lot of things, like having Teams and Zoom was not a new thing for us in 2020. I mean, we were using it all this while, but just that it got advanced. But for a lot of people in the government, Teams and Zoom it was the first time that they started using that during COVID. So I'm sure as technology advances and we see, maybe there will be some changes that will happen in the near future as well. Now, one other perspective that I was, delving deeper was on how the perception of one generation towards the other is creating challenges. And I feel it's almost outdated and rigid, right? I mean, we kind of label people as uncommitted, disloyal. What could be done to break this cycle of labeling and bias? Do you have any views on that?
Allow me to narrate something very funny, which was applicable a few generations ago in the so-called middle class Indian households.
Sure.
When the father got salary,
mm-hmm.
and on the next holiday, one of the first things that the father did was took his children along with him for a haircut. The father and the children all went for a haircut together.
Okay.
It was a monthly ritual.
Yeah.
No. Okay. And it was a normal sight to see Sunday mornings or a Saturday mornings once a 5-day came about. Father holding the hands of the two children, they could be toddlers, they could be teenagers or whoever. All of them, walking into the nearest friendly barber shop and all of them having a haircut. And there was a standardized way you cut your hair.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if there was a rebel among them who wanted to have a step cut or follow his favorite actor's hairstyle, there was a big no. All hell broke loose.
Yes.
If you remember.
Yeah.
I'd like to think, and there was, if you look at it today on hindsight, it's one of the most absurd things to do by the parent. How did it really matter which side of the hair, the parting of the hair was? It didn't really matter, did it?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any of our rivers flow in the opposite direction. But it was so serious. The reason I gave this example is because I like to believe that the Gen X and the Gen Y leaders are probably exhibiting a similar mindset today.
Yeah.
About nothing but not the why of work, but the how of work.
True.
We are willing to accept the fact. The very same people after a few years of retirement, they're willing to go in for a laser treatment when it comes to removing their cataract. Now they're not demanding the blades and these things to be used to get into their eye and removing the cataract. They want laser. It's quick, it's painless. So it's a case of being conveniently advanced.
Yeah.
What suits me, I'm advanced. What otherwise, I stick to my old guns. And I think therein lies the difference. Like I mentioned, if I were to do an apple-to-apple comparison of maybe myself as a 26 or a 28-year-old vis-a-vis today's 26 or 28, I'll tell you, I probably look like a caveman in more ways than one.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about my haircut.
Yeah.
So I'd like to believe that as the earlier generations, we need to be able to be more accommodating. And I think that this probably has happened in every generation. The difference being that with the technology now available, the changes and the movements have been far more drastic and rapid. I'll give you a simple example. The speed of adoption of a computer was probably 3 times slower than adoption of a handset, of a mobile phone.
Yeah.
And even lesser for an internet connection.
True.
So that smaller gaps would also probably apply when it comes to adapting to the newer ways of the next generation. So I think the onus does not lie on the Gen Zs and the Alphas. The onus lies on the earlier generations. Also, let's not forget, the older generations have less time to spend in the corporate world as productive citizens. The future belongs to the Gen Zs and the Gen As. It's a matter of time before we will probably get enforced into that mode of operating.
Yeah. Agree. And I just read a report recently where it said, like, by 2030, at least about 45 to 50% of workforce is going to be Gen Zs, if not Gen Alphas. But if you really put them both together, it's going to be around 50% for sure. And in light of that, I think it's going to be a very important aspect for people to rethink, reimagine perhaps their existence in workforces as well. Very well
Gopal,
said.
if you permit me, can I spin it around for a moment? I would like to look at it in reverse, having been in Gen X. Please remember, after 2030, if you go by India's superannuation age, there will be no Gen X left in the workforce.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Very true.
So it will all be them.
Yeah.
Okay. And the sooner we accept that reality, it's easier for us.
Yeah, easier for us. True that. Now, talking about, leaders that we are, seeing, especially ability of managing across. Now, there is, on one side, you have a Gen Z, perhaps in some cases like startups, you may have Gen Alphas as well, depending on which spectrum of the world that they're living in. But you have to manage upwards, let's say, managing a boomer as well, or at least Gen X for that matter. Often the struggle is inability to manage those two and together.
Correct.
And the mid-40s is a classic thing that I keep talking about, where your inability to say no to your leader and your inability to make the Gen Z say yes is costing you something, which is often leading to an exhaustion. What is missing? Like, what needs to be done by whom? Like, who should do something about this problem?
Gopal, I'd like to think that the fundamental gap in that difference or the two levels or planes of operation that we see because of the generations is a lack of trust. Okay. And allow me to use the traditional example here. When a daughter-in-law gets married and brought into the household, the mother-in-law accommodates her in the best possible way. And that's a living example for centuries in India. She takes her under her wings, helps her to adapt, while also accepting the fact that she comes from a different household, which may probably have a different set of ideologies and practices, yet helps her to imbibe and amalgamate into this family.
Yeah.
And what happens after 30 years is when this mother-in-law is no longer on this earth and the new girl becomes a mother-in-law, she replicates it and ensures that the continuity is maintained. And for this, none of them, I promise you, had gone to Harvard Business School to learn this.
Yeah.
But the fundamental remained that there was an element of acceptance, and the larger interest of the household was kept in mind.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that this needs to be adopted because the newer generation would probably come with a new set of abilities and skills, which is what the future needs.
Yeah.
I'll give you a classic example. I'm sure you remember this. When the computers were first introduced in a few forward-thinking corporates, there was an unofficial revolution of sorts or rebellion by the secretaries who were used to be manual typewriters.
Yeah.
They thought it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that we are going through a similar situation, wherein the earlier generations have no choice but to adapt. And in case we want to get what we need out of the newer generations as bosses and leaders, like I explained to you, they have certain expectations.
Hmm.
Earlier generations had the benefit of encashing on the newer generation's ignorance. Now that's disappeared. Me having passed out 20 years ago and having worked for 20 years ago, knew a little more than the management trainee. And that was my USP.
Today, no longer the case.
But whereas I'm trying to still use that as my USP and causing the so-called issues and turbulences which I see in the corporate world today. And let me assure you, the newer generation is normally more accurate and right in the information they have with them because it's available readily and it's technologically validated.
Correct.
So I think therein lies the difference. Yes, the last point I'd like to talk here is about if you see the leadership today, like I said, is operating still in the old fashion. Whereas we will now need to move into, like we explained earlier, the government offices. Gopal, you and I do not go into a government office unless there's an escalation requirement to meet them. Leaders and the Gen X and the Gen Ys need to move into that mold. We are here for you. You know your job. You have an issue or a situation that you want us to help you address. We are here for you. But that needs to be earned and that cannot be demanded.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I hope people listening into it at some point of time will take some learnings out of this and are able to work through that. Any questions, if ever, we are always there to kind of guide through this. Now, let's talk about the world of HR. HR happens to be a function that facilitates or orchestrates outcomes for an organization. But when it comes to the ways of getting things done, be it through processes, policies, of course, AI and post-COVID era has changed quite a lot of things, but we still think in many ways of, let's say, the hiring process, or let's say the ability to manage performance, let's say the ability to reward better performance, all of that in a slightly outdated fashion. There hasn't been much of, we're talking about gig economy, but it's still very nascent stages in many organizations. A lot of people don't even know how to go about working with a gig worker. And what it leads to is that we work on a one-size-fits-all mindset. What do you think we should do? I mean, what do you think practitioners in HR, or for that matter, even other functions who are enabling functions, need to do to support this multi-generational workforce?
Gopal, again, I'd like to think that the older generation is still stuck on the rigid version of, I achieved my 100%, I exceeded my 100, reached my 120%. And that translates into a 4. But that's again because, allow me to go back to what we started with. We still are operating on a scarcity-driven mindset. I need to get my increment. I need to get my bonus. The new fridge needs to be bought at home, or the scooter needs to be replaced with a car. And here I'm dealing with a set of manpower who come from sufficiency. They are sufficiently equipped for everything what their day-to-day needs, which is also the reason they don't take the job so seriously as the earlier generations did. It was not livelihood. It's a matter of purpose.
Yeah.
So unless the purpose element is being met, even in the performance appraisal process, I don't mind getting a relatively lower rating. Seems to be the newer generation's approach. The rating and the monies is not really the same. But if I've learned something, if it's made me a better professional in what I do, then you have added value to me. And value addition seems to be the new keyword. It's not increment percentage.
Yeah.
Increment percentage, of course, is important, but there is a peer pressure which still continues what they have inherited from us. But people are more now keen to be able to be having a purpose, being seen as a valid contributor to a larger picture, and being able to be shown that they have contributed to it. And believe you me, the newer generations are easier to convince of why they got moderated to a 3 instead of a 4. But the older generations who kind of hung around for 15 days, with a glum face,
Hmm.
The newer ones bounce back much faster if you're able to reason with them
Yeah. Yeah.
and show them the logic behind why they are what they are.
Very
And
interesting.
I'd like to believe that over a period of time, a performance management system again would probably have a larger scope. Assuming I were to stick to the old balance scorecard, we would all probably have the intent and the purpose of the organization as an element of percentage of whether they have contributed to that or not. The intangible today,
Yeah.
and everything wouldn't be KRA driven thereafter. Numbers would be
Yeah.
purely indicative in nature. That's almost like today what CEOs, de facto every single employee in the company would be evaluated like a CEO.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
You could make 3 times the profits, but if you've had a bad press that year, there's no way that the board is going to give you a good rating as the CEO of a company.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is the intangible.
Yeah, I agree.
And
I
that,
agree.
and that is the way I like to believe that the performance management system needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I almost getting reminded about the kind of structure of performance management that we had designed for gig workers at EY, where I was running this program on bringing in gig workers, and one of the questions was, how do we manage performance? And we said, we'll keep it simple, 5-star rating. If you've done a good job on a particular task, you'll get the rating then and there. I would not wait for the entire year to pass by to tell you
Correct.
whether you have done a good job or not. And you will be rewarded immediately. I mean, if you've really done a good job,
Absolutely.
if you have exceeded the expectations, take your money and move. So that's the kind of, perhaps that's how it will evolve in the future, and we'll see that.
Gopal,
One last
one more,
question.
sorry,
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes. Sure,
I'd like to add to the field, but I'm sorry, I missed out on one point.
Yes.
I'd like to believe that each department would probably evolve, including HR and finance, would probably evolve into what is known as a profit center model. Okay.
Wow.
So let's say Gopal is the CHR of a particular company. Logically and obviously, they do not generate revenues, but they have a budget that they operate on. Correct. Parameters like engagement scores, attritions, all being yardsticks to be measured.
Correct.
And if they have done an exemplary job and they have saved money or got money from their budget, they are free to distribute it the way they want. Okay, so which means every department, including the support function or the perceived support functions, are profit sharing departments.
True.
You make your own profits, you share it.
Yeah.
And the difference of one department performing better than the other, it becomes a natural because they've outperformed us, so they get a 20% more, which is fair and square. Next year, we overtake them in the deliverables. They will not envy us. Neither will there be a bell curve which will be enforcing and saying, no, but they are operations and you are back office, and that will disappear, and that will need to disappear. But that's what gig working is all about. I contribute and deliver my bit, and I go home.
Yeah. And which is what makes me feel that there is going to be a lot more of gig working coming up in the next few years as Gen Zs and Gen Alphas start finding more meaning and more purpose in this kind of working.
In many ways, the 4-day week is actually heading you towards that. The 4-day week that we're talking about is actually an indirect way of going there. It's a matter of time.
Yeah, it's a matter of time. So with 2030 around the corner, and we are talking about a variety of things that will change the workplace, do you have any bold prediction to make?
First and foremost, Gopal, I don't think there'll be employment in the current form that we see, the so-called 8 to 5 or 9 to 6.
Yeah.
Even your doctor would probably meet you when he or she has finished playing their round of golf and then give you a time. There's no doctor sitting in the clinic. Of course, you would have the emergency services available. Because please remember, they are part of the society and they're probably the the most daring example that I wanted to give you.
Mm.
For an emergency, you go into a hospital.
Yeah.
The casualty ward continues to work.
Mm.
The same would apply to an architect. The same would apply to an engineer. You call him when you need him, and he charges you by the hour.
Yeah.
Office space, and I will tell you what drives this. First is obviously the want of freedom, because now another thing, Gopal, that we all need to remember is we are no longer ruled by any other the government country anymore. We are all independent states across the globe.
Yes. Yes.
This timing and compliance came about because we were ruled by somebody who was superior. Now we are talking of global citizenry.
Yeah.
We are all in this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd like to think that this current way of doing things, we should also therefore break the hierarchy. CEO operates from the comfort of his office. You operate from the comfort of your apartment, as the case may be. Maybe the square feet that you occupy may be a little different based on your buying power, but otherwise we are all in this together. We're at the same level.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I envisage, because that's what the current generation of Gen Zs and Alphas are demanding in a subtle way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, we'll quickly move to a quick rapid fire, if that's okay.
Of course.
And that's an integral part of the show that I have done so far. So if you were to describe Gen Z in one word, what would that be?
Sensible.
Sensible. Okay. One workplace trend we need to retire forever.
Cabins.
Okay. Biggest myth about millennials.
That they are not disciplined.
Okay. Who adapts faster, boomers or Gen Zs?
Gen Zs, I believe.
And one leadership trait that transcends generation.
Integrity.
Wonderful. Any parting thoughts, Sajit, before we wrap up this call?
I only hope that the transition is as smooth as it has been in the past generations, when we actually moved from a bullock cart to a car.
Good one.
I'd like to believe that the transition is as harsh and as realistic now. But I'd like to believe in those days there was a higher level of acceptance. And maybe that is what I hope continues with all the generations who are presently part of your manpower workforce. The willingness to go.
Yeah.
And let's live in the process. To each his own.
Let go and let live. Absolutely. Wonderfully said, Sajit. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts, your clarity, your candor, and also the refusal to put labels. I think it's so refreshing. And I think people will really appreciate the perspectives that you shared. I think if I were to really say the way generations and generational tension exists within the organizations today, we almost think that we need to go ahead and fix it. But rather, I think what you shared is we need to show them a mirror. And I think this mirror that reflects assumptions, biases, and unwillingness to evolve is something that was the need of the hour. So thank you for doing that for us. For me, this conversation was more than a dialogue about Gen Z. It was more about a reminder that every generation arrives with its own truth. And if we are willing to listen, we all grow. To those tuning in, whether you are in HR or leadership or just trying to figure out how to work with people who seem wired differently, here is what I hope stays with you. The culture isn't created by HR or for HR manuals. It's lived in every conversation. The respect isn't about tenure, it's about trust. And maybe the problem that it's not Gen Z It's not about how to manage them. It's about that the workplace has not evolved fast enough to meet them where they are. We are not navigating change anymore. We are being asked to reimagine what work can mean for everyone. So if this episode kind of resonates with you, or stirred some thoughts in you, share it. Talk about it with your team. And most of all, ask yourself the following: am I managing people the way I was led, or the way they need to be led? The season of Journey to the Future is exactly about breaking templates, shifting stories, and learning how to lead in a world where rules are still being written. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep tuning in to the Journey to the Future on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Gopal, for having me.